The smell of whiskey and shame clung to Lorelei Norton's dress as she stumbled through the doors of her father's ranch house that March morning in 1878, knowing her life as she had known it was over. She had been foolish, trusting a silver-tongued gambler who promised her the moon and stars, only to abandon her at a saloon in Bakersfield after taking everything she had offered, including her innocence. The ride back to Quartz Hill, California, had been long and humiliating, made worse by the pitying stares of the stagecoach driver, who knew exactly what kind of girl rode alone at dawn with torn lace at her collar. Her father, Samuel Norton, stood in the doorway of their modest ranch house, his weathered face carved from granite as he took in the sight of his only daughter. The disappointment in his eyes cut deeper than any words could, and when he finally spoke, his voice was cold as winter rain. "You are a disgrace to this family," he said, each word deliberate and heavy. "No decent man will have you now. You have thrown away your future for a moment of foolishness." Lorelei felt the tears burn behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She was 20 years old enough to understand the weight of her father's pronouncement. In a town as small as Quartz Hill, word would spread like wildfire. The gambler had made certain of that, bragging in the saloons about his conquest before he disappeared into the California wilderness. Every person in their community would know what she had done, what she had become in their eyes. "I am sorry, Father," she whispered, but Samuel Norton had already turned his back on her. "You will work the ranch," he said flatly. "You will earn your keep since no husband will provide for you now. Perhaps hard labor will teach you the value of reputation." The following weeks were brutal. Lorelei worked from sunup to sundown, mending fences, hauling water, mucking out stalls. Her hands, once soft and delicate, became rough and calloused. The townspeople whispered when she rode into Quartz Hill for supplies, their voices carrying just loud enough for her to hear. Ruined, fallen, shame. The women clutched their shawls tighter and steered their daughters away from her as though her disgrace were contagious. She held her head high despite the burning humiliation, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. But at night, alone in her small room, she allowed herself to wonder if her father was right. Perhaps no man would ever want her now. Perhaps she was destined to live out her days as a cautionary tale. The girl who gave her heart to the wrong man and paid the ultimate price. Spring arrived in early April, bringing with it the promise of renewal that Lorelei could not feel in her own life. The wildflowers bloomed across the California hills, painting the landscape in brilliant yellows and purples, but she barely noticed their beauty as she worked. Her father had grown even more distant, speaking to her only when necessary, his disappointment a constant presence between them. It was on a warm April morning that Harrison Edwards rode into Quartz Hill. He was a cowboy through and through, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of aged whiskey. He wore his hat low, and his horse was a beautiful Palomino mare that moved with the grace of water flowing downstream. He had come from Wyoming, following work and the promise of ranch jobs in California, and he carried with him the kind of quiet confidence that came from a man who knew his own worth. Harrison stopped at the general store first, inquiring about work in the area. The store owner, a gossipy man named Curtis Webb, was eager to share information. "Norton Ranch might need help," Curtis said, leaning across the counter. "Though I warn you, the man's daughter is living there and she is trouble. Got herself ruined by a gambler a few weeks back. Brought shame on the whole family." Harrison's expression did not change. "I am looking for honest work, not gossip," he said evenly. "Which way to the Norton place?" Curtis looked slightly affronted but provided directions. Harrison tipped his hat and left without another word, leading his mare through the dusty streets of Quartz Hill toward the ranch that lay 3 miles outside of town. He found Samuel Norton repairing a section of fence near the main barn. The older man looked up as Harrison approached, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Help you with something?" Samuel asked gruffly. "Name is Harrison Edwards," he said, dismounting smoothly. "Heard you might need a ranch hand. I have experience with cattle, horses, and general maintenance. I work hard and I keep to myself." Samuel studied him for a long moment. "Pay is not much," he warned. "Room and board included, but the work is hard." "I am not afraid of hard work," Harrison replied. Something in the young man's steady gaze must have satisfied Samuel because he nodded slowly. "Start tomorrow at dawn. There is a bunkhouse past the barn. You can stable your horse there." Harrison extended his hand and Samuel shook it firmly. It was only as Harrison was leading his mare toward the bunkhouse that he saw her. Lorelei was carrying 2 heavy buckets of water from the well, her dark hair escaping from its braid, her dress stained with dust and work. She moved with determination despite the obvious weight of the buckets, her jaw set in concentration. When she noticed Harrison watching her, she froze, and for a moment their eyes met across the yard. She was beautiful, he thought, despite the exhaustion evident in her features and the wariness in her green eyes. There was something fierce and unbroken in her gaze, even as she quickly looked away and continued toward the barn. "That is my daughter," Samuel said coldly, appearing at Harrison's shoulder. "She works the ranch as well. You will not speak to her unless necessary for work purposes." "Do you understand?" Harrison heard the warning in the older man's voice, the protective threat that came from a father guarding his daughter from further harm. "I understand," he said simply. But as he settled his mare in the stable and unpacked his few belongings in the sparse bunkhouse, Harrison found his thoughts returning to the young woman with the fierce eyes and the heavy buckets. There had been no shame in her posture, only defiance and strength. He wondered what had put that particular combination in her gaze. The next morning, Harrison rose before dawn and reported to Samuel for his duties. The work was indeed hard, but Harrison had not exaggerated his abilities. He moved through tasks with practiced efficiency, mending fences, breaking a stubborn young colt, hauling supplies. He worked alongside Lorelei occasionally, and though they did not speak beyond what was necessary to coordinate their efforts, he was acutely aware of her presence. She was strong, he noticed, stronger than many men he had worked with. She did not complain or shy away from difficult tasks. When a fence post proved particularly stubborn, she threw her whole body into the effort of removing it, her face flushed with exertion but her determination unwavering. "Let me," Harrison said quietly, stepping forward to help. Lorelei stepped back, surprise flickering across her features. Together they wrestled the post free, and for just a moment, their hands brushed. She pulled away quickly, but not before Harrison saw the faint color rise in her cheeks. "Thank you," she said stiffly, not meeting his eyes. "You are welcome," he replied. Samuel was watching from across the yard, his expression unreadable. Harrison returned to his work without further comment, but he felt the older man's scrutiny like a weight on his shoulders. Days turned into weeks, and a routine established itself on the Norton ranch. Harrison proved himself to be exactly what he claimed, a hardworking, competent ranch hand who caused no trouble and completed every task assigned to him. Samuel grudgingly admitted to himself that hiring the cowboy had been a wise decision. But Samuel also noticed the way Harrison's gaze sometimes lingered on Lorelei when he thought no one was watching. There was no lust in those looks, nothing predatory or calculating. Instead, there was something almost like respect, perhaps even concern. It made Samuel uncomfortable in ways he could not quite articulate. Lorelei herself was intensely aware of Harrison's presence. She had expected judgment from the new ranch hand once he inevitably heard the gossip about her, but it never came. He treated her with the same quiet courtesy he showed everyone, neither avoiding her nor seeking her out. He did not whisper with the other occasional workers who came through for day labor, did not participate in the cruel jokes that sometimes drifted across the yard when her father was out of earshot. One afternoon in late April, Lorelei was working alone near the southern pasture, attempting to repair a water trough that had cracked during the winter. The work required strength she was not certain she possessed, and frustration mounted with each failed attempt to lift the heavy wooden side into place. "Need a hand?" Harrison's voice came from behind her. She jumped, not having heard him approach. Pride warred with practicality, and practicality won. "Yes," she admitted quietly. Together they maneuvered the heavy wood into position, and Harrison held it steady while Lorelei hammered the nails to secure it. They worked in silence, the only sounds the ring of the hammer and the distant lowing of cattle. "You are good at this," Harrison said when they finished. "The ranch work," Lorelei laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I have had plenty of practice lately." "I meant it as a compliment," he said gently. She looked at him then, really looked at him, searching his face for mockery or hidden cruelty. She found neither. His expression was open, honest, with perhaps a hint of admiration in his eyes. "Why are you kind to me?" she asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could stop it. "You must have heard what people say, what I did." Harrison was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I have found that people's worst moments do not define them unless they let those moments do so," he said. "What you did or did not do is none of my business. I see how hard you work, how strong you are despite everything. That tells me more about who you are than any gossip could." Lorelei felt something crack inside her chest, some hard shell she had built around her heart to protect it from further pain. "You do not know me," she whispered, but her voice wavered. "Then perhaps you might tell me about yourself," Harrison said, "if you want to." Before she could respond, Samuel's voice rang out across the pasture. "Lorelei, get back to the barn." She flinched at her father's tone and turned away quickly, gathering her tools. But as she walked back toward the ranch house, she felt Harrison's gaze on her back, warm as sunlight. That evening after supper, Samuel confronted Harrison in the barn. "I saw you talking with my daughter," he said without preamble. "Yes, sir," Harrison acknowledged. "We were working on the water trough." "I told you to keep your distance," Samuel said, his voice hard. "She is not for you. She is not for any man. She made her choices, and now she must live with the consequences." Harrison met the older man's gaze steadily. "With respect, sir, your daughter seems to be living with those consequences quite well. She is one of the hardest workers I have ever seen." "You do not understand," Samuel said, some of the hardness cracking to reveal the pain beneath. "She was my only child. I had such hopes for her. A good marriage, a respectable life. And she threw it all away for a man who saw her as nothing more than a conquest." "So you will punish her for the rest of her life?" Harrison asked quietly. "Keep her isolated and shamed." Samuel's face darkened with anger. "You overstep, Edwards." "Perhaps," Harrison agreed. "But I see a young woman who made a mistake and is working herself to the bone trying to atone for it. I see a father who loves his daughter but does not know how to forgive her, and I think you are both suffering for it." "You know nothing about my family," Samuel snapped. "You are right," Harrison said, "but I know about making mistakes. I know about trying to outrun your past. And I know that sometimes the hardest thing in the world is to accept forgiveness, whether from others or yourself." Samuel stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. Harrison returned to his bunkhouse, wondering if he had just talked himself out of a job. But the next morning, Samuel said nothing about their conversation. Work continued as usual, though Harrison noticed that the older man watched him more carefully now, weighing and measuring something Harrison could not quite identify. May arrived with warmer weather and longer days. The ranch work intensified as they prepared for the summer months ahead. Harrison and Lorelei found themselves working together more frequently, and slowly, carefully, they began to talk. She told him about growing up on the ranch, about her mother who had died when Lorelei was 12, about the loneliness that had made her vulnerable to the gambler's false promises. He told her about his own childhood in Wyoming, about learning to cowboy from his father, about the restlessness that had driven him south in search of something he could not quite name. "Did you find it?" she asked one afternoon as they rode together to check on the cattle in the far pasture. "What you were looking for?" Harrison looked at her, taking in the way the sunlight caught in her dark hair, the strength in her posture despite everything life had thrown at her. "I think I might be starting to," he said softly. Lorelei's breath caught, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, sitting on their horses beneath the vast California sky. Then she looked away, fear flickering across her face. "You should not say such things to me," she whispered. "I am ruined, Harrison. Damaged goods." "My father is right about that." "Your father is wrong," Harrison said firmly. He guided his horse closer to hers until their knees almost touched. "You are not ruined, Lorelei. You are brave and strong and more remarkable than you know." "You do not understand what it means," she said, and now tears were sliding down her cheeks. "I gave myself to a man outside of marriage. I trusted him, and he used me and then told everyone what we had done. The whole town knows. I can never be a proper wife, never have the respect of decent people." "Then maybe decent people are not as decent as they think they are," Harrison said. "Maybe their respect is not worth having if it is so easily lost." "It is easy for you to say," Lorelei replied, wiping at her tears angrily. "You are a man. The world does not judge you the way it judges me." "You are right," Harrison acknowledged. "And that is unjust and wrong. But it does not change how I see you, Lorelei. It does not change the fact that every day I work beside you, I admire you more. Your strength, your refusal to be broken by what happened, your determination to keep going despite everything." "Harrison," she whispered, his name a plea and a prayer all at once. "I am not asking you for anything," he said gently. "I just want you to know that you are seen. Not as the town sees you, but as you truly are." They sat there for a long moment, the cattle grazing peacefully around them, the California hills rolling away in golden waves. Then Lorelei nodded slowly and turned her horse back toward the ranch. But something had shifted between them. Some invisible boundary had been crossed. They both felt it, acknowledged it without words. Samuel Norton was not a foolish man. He saw the way his daughter's demeanor had begun to change, the way some of the hardness had left her eyes. He saw the way she and Harrison moved around each other with an awareness that spoke of growing attachment, and it terrified him. One evening, he called Harrison to the house after supper. Lorelei had retired to her room and Samuel poured 2 glasses of whiskey, sliding one across the table to the younger man. "I have been watching you," Samuel said without preamble. "You are a good worker, honest and reliable, but I also see the way you look at my daughter." Harrison did not deny it. "She is easy to admire," he said simply. "She is ruined," Samuel said flatly. "You could have any unmarried woman in California. Why would you set your sights on one who has already been with another man?" "Because I do not see her the way you do," Harrison replied. "I do not see her as ruined or damaged. I see her as someone who made a mistake and is paying far too high a price for it. "The price is what it is," Samuel said bitterly. "Society has rules for a reason." "Society's rules are often cruel," Harrison countered, "especially to women." She was lied to, manipulated by a man who saw her as prey. Why should she bear all the shame while he rides free? Samuel was silent, staring into his whiskey glass. "I wanted better for her," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "She was supposed to marry well, have children, be respected. I failed her as a father." "You did not fail her," Harrison said, "but you are failing her now by refusing to forgive her. She needs her father, not a judge and jailer." "And what would you have me do?" Samuel demanded. "Pretend it never happened. Let her marry despite her disgrace." "I would have you love her," Harrison said simply. "Love her enough to let her rebuild her life. Love her enough to stand beside her against the gossip and judgment. Love her enough to let her be happy again." Samuel looked at him sharply. "Are you saying you want to marry her?" Harrison met his gaze steadily. "I am saying that I would be honored if she would have me, but that decision is hers to make, not mine to force." "No man of substance will want her," Samuel said, but his voice lacked conviction now. "I am a man of substance," Harrison replied. "Perhaps not wealthy or prominent, but I know my own worth. I work hard, I am honest, and I would treat her with the respect and love she deserves." Samuel stood abruptly, walking to the window to stare out at the darkening landscape. "She has been through enough pain," he said quietly. "I will not allow her to be hurt again." "Then we agree on something," Harrison said, "because I would never hurt her." "You say that now," Samuel said. "But what happens when the novelty wears off? When you realize what it means to be married to a woman with a reputation? The whispers, the judgment, the doors that will be closed to you." "I have never cared much for society's doors," Harrison said. "And I would rather have a real life with Lorelei, whispers and all, than a respectable life with someone I do not love." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Samuel turned slowly to face him. "You love her?" he asked, searching Harrison's face. "I do," Harrison said simply. "I know it is quick, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Samuel sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 53 years. "I do not know if I can give you my blessing," he admitted. "I do not know if I can watch her risk her heart again." "You do not have to give your blessing tonight," Harrison said, "but I hope in time you will see that I mean what I say. I would spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of her if that is what it takes." After Harrison left, Samuel sat alone in the dark house, wrestling with his thoughts. He had been so certain that his daughter's life was over, that her mistake had irrevocably destroyed her future. But Harrison's words had planted a seed of doubt, or perhaps it was hope. Could Lorelei truly have a second chance? Could she find happiness despite everything in her room? Lorelei lay awake, her mind spinning. She had heard voices from below, recognized Harrison's deep tones mingling with her father's rougher cadence. She wondered what they were discussing, hoped desperately that her father had not driven Harrison away with harsh words and ultimatums. The truth was that she had fallen in love with the quiet cowboy. She had not meant to, had tried to protect her heart from further pain, but Harrison had slipped past her defenses with his kindness and steady presence. He saw her not as the town saw her, but as she wished to be seen, as a whole person worthy of respect and care. But loving him felt dangerous, foolish even. What could he possibly want with her? Surely once the initial attraction faded, he would see her as everyone else did, as tainted and shameful. The fear of that eventual rejection was almost worse than never trying at all. The following Sunday, the town of Quartz Hill held a community gathering at the church. It was a monthly tradition, with families bringing food to share, and the afternoon spent in fellowship. Samuel had stopped attending after Lorelei's scandal, unable to bear the whispers and judgmental stares. But on this particular Sunday, Harrison approached Samuel with a proposal. "Let us go to the gathering," he said, "all three of us." Samuel looked at him as though he had lost his mind. "Absolutely not. I will not subject my daughter to that. She cannot hide forever," Harrison said gently. "And neither can you. You are part of this community. So is she." "They will tear her apart with their gossip," Samuel protested. "Perhaps," Harrison agreed. "Or perhaps it is time to show them that she is still here, still standing, still worthy of being part of this town." Lorelei, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "I will go," she said quietly. "Harrison is right. I cannot hide forever." "Lorelei," Samuel said, pain evident in his voice. "I am tired of being ashamed, Father," she said. "I made a mistake, but I am still a person. I still deserve to live." Samuel looked between his daughter and the cowboy who stood beside her with such quiet confidence. Something in him shifted, some final resistance crumbling away. "Then we will go," he said gruffly. "Together." The walk into town was tense. Lorelei wore her best dress, a blue calico that had been her mother's. Harrison had cleaned up as well, his shirt pressed and his boots polished. Samuel walked stiffly, his jaw set with determination. As they approached the church grounds, conversation faltered and died. Heads turned, eyes widened. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Lorelei felt her courage begin to fail, felt the familiar shame rising in her throat. But then Harrison was there, offering her his arm with a gentle smile. "Hold your head high," he murmured. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." She took his arm, drawing strength from his solid presence. Together they walked into the gathering, Samuel following close behind. The next few hours were perhaps the most difficult of Lorelei's life. Some people turned away entirely, refusing to acknowledge her presence. Others stared openly, their judgment written clearly on their faces. The women clutched their husbands tighter, as though Lorelei's mere proximity might corrupt their marriages. But there were also unexpected kindnesses. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow who ran the boarding house, approached with a gentle smile. "It is good to see you, Lorelei dear," she said warmly. "You look well." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," Lorelei managed, tears pricking her eyes at the unexpected acceptance. "We all make mistakes," the older woman continued. "Some of us are just better at hiding them than others." She patted Lorelei's hand and moved on, leaving Lorelei staring after her in astonishment. Harrison stayed close throughout the afternoon, a steady, protective presence. When a group of young men made crude comments just loud enough to be heard, Harrison turned to them with a look so cold and dangerous that they quickly moved away. When the pastor's wife deliberately snubbed Lorelei, Harrison simply guided her toward friendlier company without comment. Samuel watched all of this, seeing his daughter gradually relax as she realized the day would not end in complete disaster. He saw the way Harrison cared for her, protecting her without making her feel weak, supporting her without making her feel helpless. And he saw the way Lorelei looked at the cowboy, with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something that looked remarkably like love. As the afternoon waned and they prepared to leave, Curtis Webb from the general store approached Samuel. "That your daughter's intended?" he asked, nodding toward Harrison. "I am not certain," Samuel said carefully. "Well, if he is a better man than most," Curtis said grudgingly. "Stood up for her all afternoon without making a scene about it. That takes character." Samuel nodded slowly, seeing Harrison through new eyes. Perhaps the cowboy was not just speaking empty words. Perhaps he truly meant everything he had said. The ride back to the ranch was quiet but peaceful. As they approached the house, Lorelei turned to Harrison. "Thank you," she said softly, for today, for standing beside me." "I will always stand beside you," Harrison replied. "If you will let me." Their eyes met and held, and Samuel cleared his throat awkwardly. "I will see to the horses," he said, giving them privacy. Once Samuel had moved away, Harrison took Lorelei's hand gently. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I spoke with your father the other evening. I told him that I love you." Lorelei's breath caught. "You what?" "I love you, Lorelei," he said simply. "I know it is fast, and I know you have every reason to be wary of men's words after what you have been through. But I mean this with my whole heart. You are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known, and I would be honored if you would allow me to court you properly." Tears were streaming down Lorelei's face now, but they were tears of hope rather than pain. "I do not understand," she whispered. "Why would you want me, after everything?" "Because everything you have been through has made you who you are," Harrison said, reaching up to gently wipe her tears away. "And who you are is extraordinary. Your past does not frighten me, Lorelei. What frightens me is the thought of a future without you in it." "I love you too," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I did not want to, I tried not to, but I love you, Harrison." He smiled then, a brilliant expression of pure joy that transformed his entire face. "Then may I court you?" he asked. "May I prove to you and your father and this entire town that you are worthy of being loved and cherished?" "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, please." Harrison pulled her into his arms then, holding her gently as though she were something precious and fragile. But Lorelei knew she was not fragile, not anymore. She had been broken and had forged herself back together stronger than before. And now, with Harrison's love, she was beginning to believe she truly could have a future. Samuel watched from the barn, seeing his daughter embrace the cowboy with such obvious joy. His heart ached with the weight of his own stubbornness, his own harsh judgment. Harrison had been right about so many things. Lorelei deserved forgiveness, deserved love, deserved the chance to be happy. He walked toward them slowly, and they separated as he approached. Samuel looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the shame he had been projecting onto her, but the beautiful, strong woman she had become despite everything. "Lorelei," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology." She stared at him in shock. "Father." "I was wrong," he continued, the words coming with difficulty but sincerity. "Wrong to judge you so harshly, wrong to punish you when you were already hurting. You made a mistake, yes, but you did not deserve the cruelty I showed you. I was so caught up in my own disappointment, in my own wounded pride, that I forgot what was most important. You are my daughter and I love you. Can you forgive me?" Lorelei rushed into her father's arms, sobbing against his chest as he held her tightly. "Of course I forgive you," she cried. "Of course I do." Samuel looked over his daughter's head at Harrison, seeing the cowboy watching with understanding and compassion. He nodded slowly at the younger man, a gesture of respect and acceptance. Harrison nodded back. When Lorelei finally pulled away from her father, she was smiling through her tears. "I have something to tell you," she said. "Harrison has asked to court me." Samuel took a deep breath, then let it out slowly. "And what did you say?" "I said yes," Lorelei replied, a hint of defiance in her voice as though daring her father to object, but Samuel surprised her by smiling. "Then I suppose I should get to know my daughter's suitor better," he said, extending his hand to Harrison. "Welcome to the family, son." The courtship that followed was proper and old-fashioned in all the ways that mattered. Harrison treated Lorelei with unfailing respect, never pushing her beyond what she was comfortable with. They spent their days working side by side on the ranch, their evenings sitting on the porch talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his dreams of someday having his own ranch, a modest spread where he could raise horses and cattle. She told him about her love of reading, how her mother had taught her from books that still lined the shelves of the ranch house. They discussed their childhoods, their fears, their hopes for the future. Samuel watched their relationship develop with growing approval. Harrison was exactly as he had promised to be. Honest, hardworking, devoted to Lorelei in ways that went far beyond physical attraction. He saw his daughter bloom under the cowboy's steady affection, saw her confidence return and strengthen. The town's opinion shifted more slowly, but it did shift. Seeing Harrison's unwavering commitment to Lorelei, seeing the way he treated her with such obvious respect and love, some of the harsher judgments began to soften. Mrs. Patterson became a vocal supporter, reminding anyone who would listen that forgiveness was a Christian virtue. Even Curtis Webb at the general store began greeting Lorelei politely when she came in for supplies. There were still those who refused to accept her, who crossed the street rather than walk past her, or who made cutting remarks just loud enough to be heard. But Lorelei found that their opinions mattered less and less as time went on. She had Harrison's love, her father's forgiveness, and her own hard-won self-respect. That was enough. In late June, as summer heat settled over Quartz Hill, Harrison approached Samuel formally. "Sir, I would like to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage," he said. Samuel looked at the young man who had come into their lives just 3 months earlier and had somehow changed everything. "You have my blessing," he said. "You are a good man, Harrison Edwards. My daughter is lucky to have you." "I am the lucky one," Harrison corrected gently. "She is everything I never knew I was looking for." That evening, Harrison took Lorelei on a walk to the highest hill on the Norton property. The sun was setting, painting the California sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. They sat together on the grass, looking out over the ranch spread below them. "Lorelei Norton," Harrison said, taking her hand. "I do not have much to offer you, no grand house, no fortune. Just a cowboy's wages and a heart that is entirely yours. But if you will have me, I promise to spend every day of my life proving that you made the right choice. I promise to love you, to respect you, to stand beside you no matter what challenges we face. Will you marry me?" Lorelei looked at the man who had seen her at her lowest point and had never wavered in his belief in her worth. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I will marry you, Harrison Edwards." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Lorelei felt the last pieces of her broken heart finally mend completely. She was not ruined. She was not damaged. She was simply a woman who had made a mistake, learned from it, and found love on the other side of shame. They were married in August of 1878 in a simple ceremony at the Norton Ranch. The pastor agreed to perform the service, and Mrs. Patterson stood as witness alongside Samuel. It was a small gathering, but it was filled with genuine warmth and joy. Lorelei wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew, with wildflowers woven into her dark hair. Harrison wore his best suit, and the look in his eyes when he saw his bride walking toward him made several people tear up with the sheer emotion of it. "Do you, Harrison Edwards, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the pastor asked. "I do," Harrison said firmly, his gaze never leaving Lorelei's face. "And do you, Lorelei Norton, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she replied, her voice clear and certain. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed her to the applause of their small audience. Samuel stood watching, tears streaming down his weathered face, finally understanding that love was stronger than shame, that redemption was always possible for those brave enough to seek it. Harrison had saved enough money to rent a small cabin on the edge of town, and Samuel gifted them a portion of his land as a wedding present. "Build your ranch here," he told them. "Stay close. You are family." The first months of their marriage were filled with hard work and happiness. They began building their own modest ranch house with help from Samuel and a few friendly neighbors who had come to respect Harrison's integrity. Harrison took on additional work to supplement their income, sometimes riding out for days at a time to help with cattle drives or roundups. Lorelei missed him desperately when he was gone, but she used the time to work on their home, to plant a garden, to begin building the life they had dreamed of together. And when he returned, his arrivals were joyful reunions filled with laughter and love. In November, Lorelei discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified to tell Harrison, afraid of what it might mean, afraid of facing motherhood after everything she had been through. But when she finally gathered the courage to share the news, he swept her into his arms with such obvious joy that her fears melted away. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents. You are not afraid?" she asked. "Not worried about what people will say. Let them say what they want," Harrison replied. "They will count the months and nod to each other as though they knew all along, but we will know the truth. This child is ours, conceived in love and marriage. That is all that matters." The pregnancy was not easy. Lorelei suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months, and the physical demands of ranch work became increasingly difficult as her belly swelled. But Harrison was endlessly patient and supportive, taking on extra tasks to lighten her load, bringing her ginger tea to settle her stomach, holding her when she was exhausted and overwhelmed. Samuel became an excited grandfather in waiting, already planning how he would teach his grandchild to ride, to rope, to work cattle. Seeing him so involved, so happy, made Lorelei realize how much her father's anger had hurt him as well. They had all been trapped in the aftermath of her mistake, and they had all been freed by forgiveness and love. Their son was born in June of 1879, exactly 10 months after their wedding. The labor was long and difficult, and Harrison stayed by Lorelei's side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement even when she screamed at him to leave her alone. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Harrison cried openly. "He is beautiful," he said, cradling his son with careful reverence. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him Henry Samuel Edwards, after no one in particular but with names that felt strong and solid. Henry was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them up at all hours, but filled their small cabin with such joy that neither parent minded the exhaustion. Samuel was besotted with his grandson, visiting nearly every day to hold the baby and marvel at his tiny features. "He has your eyes, Lorelei," he would say, "and his father's stubborn chin." Watching her father with her son, seeing the pure love in his weathered face, Lorelei felt a deep sense of peace. Her life had not turned out the way anyone had expected, but it had turned out beautifully nonetheless. She had been broken and had rebuilt herself. She had been shamed and had found redemption. She had been told no man would have her, and she had found a man who loved her exactly as she was. As Henry grew from infant to toddler, the Edwards Ranch grew as well. Harrison's skill with horses earned them a solid reputation, and they began breeding and training quality mounts that sold well throughout California. Money was never plentiful, but it was enough. They added rooms to their house, expanded their barn, built a life that was modest but deeply satisfying. Lorelei's reputation in Quartz Hill continued to evolve. Some would never forgive her perceived transgression, but most people came to see her as Harrison did, as a woman who had made a mistake and had paid for it many times over. She was polite to everyone, held her head high, and let her actions speak for themselves. In 1881, their second child was born, a daughter they named Laura Marie. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes and a personality that showed itself from birth as fierce and determined. Henry, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. The Edwards family became a fixture in Quartz Hill, respected if not universally beloved. Harrison served on the town council for a time, and Lorelei started a lending library from their home, sharing her beloved books with anyone who wanted to read them. Slowly but surely, they built bridges in a community that had once turned its back on her. Samuel lived to see his grandchildren grow, teaching Henry to ride when the boy was 4 and delighting in Laura's stubborn independence that reminded him so much of his daughter. He passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1885, having made his peace with the world and with himself. Lorelei grieved deeply for her father, but she also felt profound gratitude. He had hurt her with his initial harsh judgment, but he had also given her the precious gift of forgiveness and acceptance before it was too late. She made certain Henry and Laura knew stories about their grandfather, keeping his memory alive. The years passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Harrison and Lorelei worked side by side through droughts and good seasons, through struggles and triumphs. They had 2 more children, twins born in 1884 that they named Hannah and Harold, rounding out their family at 4 children who filled their home with noise and laughter and love. As their children grew, Harrison and Lorelei told them the truth about their mother's past in age-appropriate ways. They taught them about mistakes and forgiveness, about how love could heal even the deepest wounds. They raised their children to be kind but strong, compassionate but unbending in the face of injustice. Henry grew into a fine young man who inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's intelligence. Laura became a teacher, fierce in her defense of education for all children regardless of their circumstances. Hannah developed a gift for healing and studied to become a nurse. Harold took over the ranch operations, expanding them beyond what his parents had dreamed possible. Through it all, Harrison and Lorelei's love remained the foundation of everything they built. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, talking about their day, making plans for the future. Harrison still looked at his wife with the same admiration he had felt that first day, when he saw her carrying water buckets with fierce determination. Lorelei still marveled at the man who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. One spring evening in 1898, when they were both in their 40s and their children were grown with families of their own, Harrison and Lorelei rode out to the hill where he had proposed all those years ago. The California sunset painted the sky in the same brilliant colors, and they sat together in comfortable silence, hands intertwined. "You ever regret it?" Lorelei asked quietly. "Marrying me? The struggles it caused, the judgment we faced?" Harrison turned to her with surprise. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Lorelei, you and the life we have built together." "I used to think my life was over," she said softly. "After what happened with the gambler, after my father's words. I thought I was ruined beyond redemption." "You were never ruined," Harrison said, as he had said so many times before. "You were hurt and you healed. You were broken and you became stronger in the mending. That is not ruin. That is transformation." Lorelei leaned her head on her husband's shoulder, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon. "That spring," she said, "when you came to the ranch, that was when my life truly began." "Mine too," Harrison replied, kissing the top of her head. They sat together as darkness fell. 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a love story from the ashes of shame and judgment. Her father had said no man would have her after the disgrace, but the cowboy had proved him wrong. Harrison had not just wanted her, he had cherished her, had stood beside her through everything, had shown her what real love looked like. Their grandchildren would later hear the story of how their grandparents met, how love had conquered shame, how forgiveness had healed old wounds. They would learn that mistakes do not define a person, that redemption is always possible, that true love sees past society's harsh judgments to the worth of the human heart. And on warm spring evenings, when the California sky turned gold and the wildflowers bloomed across the hills, Harrison and Lorelei Edwards would sit together on their porch, surrounded by the family and life they had built, living proof that the cruelest words can be proven wrong by the power of steadfast love. Their ranch prospered for generations, passed down to children and grandchildren who carried forward the lessons their remarkable grandparents had taught them. The town of Quartz Hill grew and changed, and with time, Lorelei's story became not one of scandal but one of redemption, a testament to the possibility of second chances and the transformative power of love that sees beyond the surface to the truth beneath. Harrison and Lorelei grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced the challenges that all long marriages face, the disagreements and frustrations, the worries about children and grandchildren, the physical aches and pains of aging bodies. But through it all, they remained each other's greatest supporter, closest friend, and truest love. When Harrison passed away in 1910 at the age of 57 from a sudden heart attack, Lorelei grieved as though part of her own soul had been torn away. She had loved him for 32 years, had built an entire life with him, had found herself through his unwavering belief in her worth. The ranch felt empty without his presence, too quiet without his deep voice and steady step. But even in her grief, Lorelei recognized the extraordinary gift she had been given. She had been loved deeply and completely by a man who saw her for who she truly was. She had raised 4 beautiful children and been surrounded by grandchildren. She had built a life that mattered, that had touched countless others in ways large and small. She lived another 12 years, remaining active on the ranch and in the community until her death in 1922 at the age of 64. Her children gathered around her bedside as she slipped away peacefully, and her last words were of Harrison. "I see him," she whispered, a smile on her weathered face. "He is waiting for me." They buried her next to her husband on the hill where he had proposed, the spot that had become sacred to their family. The headstone reads simply, "Lorelei Norton Edwards, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She was never ruined, only transformed." The story of Lorelei and Harrison became part of the Edwards family legacy, told and retold across the generations. It became a story about courage and redemption, about how love can heal shame, about how the cruelest judgments can be proven wrong by those brave enough to live their truth. Long after both of them were gone, their great-great-grandchildren would visit that hill in Quartz Hill, California, would stand by the headstones and imagine the spring of 1878, when a disgraced young woman and a cowboy with nothing but integrity and love proved that second chances are real, that no mistake is beyond forgiveness, and that true love sees not what was but what can be. The ranch still stands today, carefully preserved by the Edwards family as a testament to their remarkable ancestors. Visitors come to see where Lorelei and Harrison built their life together, to hear the story of how one woman's worst moment became the prelude to her greatest happiness, to remember that we are all more than our mistakes, more than society's judgments, more than our worst days. On spring evenings, when the California sun sets over Quartz Hill and the wildflowers bloom across the golden hills, those who know the story say you can sometimes feel their presence there on that hilltop. 2 souls who loved each other beyond reason, beyond judgment, beyond all the forces that tried to tear them apart. They found each other in the spring of 1878, and their love story proved that shame has no power over those brave enough to accept forgiveness and strong enough to offer it. Her father had said no man would have her after the disgrace. But the cowboy proved him wrong that spring, and in doing so, wrote a love story for the ages.